Guys, I want to welcome you all to another episode of the Advisory Board Podcast. And I've got a guest with me today that most of you probably know, and if you don't, you probably should know. The man, the myth, and the legend, Mark Siebert, the co-founder, CEO of I almost said the iFranchise group. I almost said Top Fire, but it's part of the family of brands that you guys operate. Guys, Mark's been in the industry for almost 40 years, 40 years of helping people improve their franchise systems. So listen up today. You're going to get some great advice. But before I bungle any more introductions, Mark, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us a little bit more about iFranchise Group, because I want everyone to understand why should they care about your advice when we start talking about the topic today of what are best practices and some of the trends happening in franchise sales and marketing for people trying to get more franchisees into their concept.
Well, first of all, thanks, Dave, for having me on. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. iFranchise Group, as you said, has been around for a long time. I've been around as a company since 1998. And what we do is we specialize in working with companies that are trying to do a better job with their franchise programs. Mm-hmm. So we do work in four basic areas. We help in the area of strategy. We help in the area of quality control. We help in the area of implementing franchise programs. And where it's more germane today is we help in sort of the areas of franchise marketing and franchise development, mostly in coaching and developing plans and developing collateral materials and occasionally in implementing. The thing that really makes us different is sort of the type of people that we recruit to help us. So our average senior consultant has 25 plus years of experience in franchising, either working for franchise companies in some kind of an executive role or working somewhere in the industry in some kind of executive role. Wow. So we look for people that have that kind of background and have that kind of experience because we think that really when you're paying for a consulting firm, what you're really paying for is the experience and the track record and the ability to get things done that comes with that experience. And so that's what we try to bring to the table. And I'm probably the least experienced, least educated person on my team when it comes to sort of the franchise background. I've got really great people, really great team. They come from a variety of different industries. And I think our track record with companies that have grown very, very fast, everybody from, companies like in the old days, like a Buffalo Wild Wings or a Massage Envy to a QC Kinetics today that sold 500 franchises in their first 4 years, sort of demonstrates that, we know how to generate the leads and know how to get things done from that standpoint. So hopefully that tells us a little bit about us.
Yeah, well, and the fact that when you go to conferences, your clients want to see you and high five you, that's always a good sign. Mark, you guys certainly have a great reputation in the industry, and I'm grateful that you made some time. You carved out a bit of time to kind of dive into the topic with me today. So guys, we're just to frame this up. The landscape is changing. Yet again, we're in kind of a little bit of a economic turmoil in a way, and this isn't doom and gloom, but there's a huge opportunity when we see little rolls in the economy like this. And so what we want to talk about today is what are some of the trends? What are some of the things, best practices you should be thinking about, and also what's changing in the landscape of franchise sales and marketing best practices? And Mark's company was founded the year I graduated high school. Guys, this is not something we don't want to skip this one. So I'd recommend you listen and take some notes, and this will all be posted so you can access it, and I'll provide some summary notes as well. But Mark, let's just start with trending. What are some of the things that you're seeing, things that are changing in the way that franchises are being sold, what's happening in the market, the process, the tools that are being used? Give us some of your wisdom as you've seen this market evolve a lot over the years. What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, there's a number of trends that, from a big picture are very interesting. And, the pandemic has really brought a lot of these trends into sort of sharp relief. One of the trends that's happened from the sales perspective is that the sales process has changed a lot. We are seeing that a lot of the sales process is being done remotely these days, a lot more so, a lot less high touch than it used to be. We are seeing that the sales process is being compressed. We're seeing higher close rates than we've seen. For many decades, we saw a close rate that was approaching about 2%, and it was pretty consistently between about 1.8 and 2.2%. And in the last couple of years, the close rate's gone up to about 3 to 3.5%. And that's a huge jump when you think about it from a percentage standpoint in terms of overall close rate. A lot of that has to do with people not wanting to go back to their traditional jobs and people having a different viewpoint of what their careers are going to look like. And we're seeing, if you look at some of the trends in terms of new business formation, which sort of mirrors this, and you look at, for example, the formation of new entities, or the EIN statistics that are put out by the Department of Labor, you see that they've essentially increased by almost 100% from the pandemic to now. And this is another indication that this is a trend that not only has started since the pandemic, but has continued since the pandemic. It has not gone down at all since the pandemic. So this sort of way of getting into business for yourself is really, it sort of instantly accelerated after the pandemic and has continued throughout today. And I don't see any short-term end to it in sight at this point in time. So that's one of the trends. And then from the standpoint of lead generation, there are some longer-term trends at play here. Things like sort of changes in the brokerage community, things like some changes in terms of the efficiencies that you're seeing on the internet and where leads are coming from on the internet and how leads are being generated on the internet, in terms of what is successful and what is not successful. I mean, I can go into those in more detail if you like. I don't want to ramble too much here.
No. Well, first of all, not rambling at all. These are just like each one of these topics we could probably dive into for half an hour together. So I think things that I want to just reiterate, and then let's dive into the last two that you just talked about, are with close rates going up. There's also kind of a counterbalance to that, though, too, with some of the lead sources that you're about to talk about. So I think we saw this when the pandemic hit. We also saw it like 07, 08, where things get a little tight in the economy. And also there's a bit of you see a lot of disenfranchisement right now with corporate America. Layoffs are huge. I mean, we've had 30, 40,000 people that have been announced or being laid off from major corporate roles across America right now, just from like 3 or 4 corporations. So there's also a lot of talent with golden parachutes entering the marketplace right now. That's a key trend I think everyone's got to pay attention to, because when we saw it happen before, franchise sales went up, quality of leads went up, the volume of leads actually went down a little bit. And so I think it's a good time in the industry where I think if you're paying attention, you're doing things right, get the right net and start scooping more good candidates up. It's a good time to eat up market share, where a lot of people, when you see the trend, that the market trends going down, a lot of people will cinch up budgets and reduce their spend, and they lose market share when others are being creative and thoughtful and gaining. So anytime there's a little bit of market turmoil, there's an opportunity to eat up market share. And I'd recommend you guys listening to Mark, pay attention to some of the trends he talks about, and see if this is a good way for you strategically to gain some market share when everybody else might be getting more conservative. Mark, let's go back to the two things you just talked about. You mentioned the broker community has changed, and also the leads, kind of the online, the digital lead sources are changing. Let's invert the order. Let's talk about the digital lead sources first, because I want to talk about brokers about a bit as well, but let's focus on them later. Talk about that. So you guys, you own a company, a great company that does digital lead generation, Top Fire Media. Or at least I don't know if it's what the actual business relationship is, but you guys are partnered, connected at the hip, and they do a great job. But because of that, you have great insights into what's actually happening in the modern lead gen world. Tell us what you're seeing with digital leads right now.
Well, what we're seeing essentially, I mean, the number and the quantity of leads that are being generated by most franchisors, 70% of leads plus that are generated by most franchisors are generated on the internet. And in fact, if you start factoring in leads that are that actually see you on the internet, but maybe don't get attributed to it. So for things like public relations or a print ad where somebody goes to the internet and then reads you there, it's really probably a higher number even than that.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the internet presence that a company has is really a very very strong indicator of their ability to sort of capture the right leads and capture them appropriately. Mm-hmm. But people, when they're capturing these leads, they often are not aware of some of the basics that they need to be aware of in terms of sort of, and it's not just the trends, but it's some of the things that are sort of the basics that are out there. So, for example, a lot of people are out there and they will put just a button on their page, and instead of doing a fully separate franchise website, and so they're really not optimizing for franchising, and Google ends up getting confused because they don't know whether they're selling widgets or they're selling franchises on the website.
Oh yeah.
They don't or they'll provide too much information about the franchise so that it makes it easy for somebody to eliminate the franchise without ever calling for information, or they won't have a value proposition to go in and get that information. Yeah. So it's important to understand what you need to provide and what that value proposition is. But it's also important to as you're doing this, the people people, when they set up these campaigns, a lot of times will set them up in a way that will drive responses that really shouldn't be responding, or that you don't really want responding. Someone would be searching McDonald's franchise, and you'll get that as a lead, and you'll end up paying for that lead on a pay-per-click campaign. Mm-hmm. Something like that costs you money, and it's worthless to you. People don't make use of a negative keyword, for example, to try and avoid those kinds of things. So there's a lot of things that people need to be doing from a pay-per-click standpoint and from a website optimization standpoint that they're not taking advantage of. And so what we're seeing as a result of that is that the lead quality that people are getting is oftentimes not as high, and the close rates are not as high as they once were. Mm-hmm. So lead quality is starting to go down a little bit. When we're looking at certain types of sites, for example, if you're looking at the portals over time have gone from a pay-for-placement position to a pay-per-lead standpoint. They've now started to optimize around pay-per-lead, and in the process are providing lots of leads, but the leads are oftentimes of such poor quality that the leads themselves don't even remember having inquired. You end up not getting people who have even that don't even answer the phone. You have a contact rate of below 50%, and yet you're paying for these leads. Mm-hmm. So it's important. So some of the things that we're doing, to avoid that kind of thing is if we're doing, when we're doing some of these things, we will do a lot of social media, and we'll do a lot. We've got some lookalike databases that we will use to allow us to capture very specific types of people. Mm-hmm. This is when I say we, I mean Top Farm Media, that they will use to capture some very specific types of leads that are going to be a lot more targeted, and that's really the key, is getting in front of the right people mm-hmm. with the messaging and not getting in front of the wrong people.
Yeah, no, and I want to. There are a couple of just key nuggets I think that we could dive into and think what you just shared, Mark. So let me take it one step back, because we talked about the quality of leads going down a little bit, and the portal leads. obviously, they've got a business model where they're trying to get more, they're trying to sell that lead information to more and more people. And I've even been on some of the sites before and seen that they're auto selecting similar brands or similar
Yep.
concepts, and unbeknownst to the lead that's on their website, trying to learn about, let's say, CertaPro house painting, and then all of a sudden they're marking underneath that they're also interested in Blue Frog plumbing and painter and a restoration concept and things like that. Then they submit their info, and then boom, that lead gets sold to 3 different brokers. And 2 of the 3 concepts they didn't even know that they said they were interested in. Like I don't want to throw shade or anything, but it certainly is contributing to this trend, I think, of diminishing value and awareness of those leads.
Yep.
But the way that you're seeing people can combat that is by having a strong controlled, I'm putting my labels on it, but having a strong controlled channel of lead generation, meaning I'm not dependent on third party's quality or third party's ethics to generate this. It's your controlled channel, meaning your own SEO, your own social, your own PPC campaigns that are driving your own results. Those things tend to deliver more consistent results over time, though, as you mentioned, they need fine tuning, right? You mentioned a really good tip I want to highlight, using a negative keyword to disqualify the lead. I just want to say you're going to have to do it one way or another. And you have to think through this. Do I want to disqualify that lead? That's definitely not the right fit at the top of my funnel using digital media properties, so it never hits my team and wastes my time? Or do I want more leads coming in to get a better marketing metric that I can report, and then have to waste more of my team's time, which is much more valuable, to disqualify that lead because they're irrelevant? Those are really important decisions to make strategically in your marketing process. Yes, everyone wants a ton of leads, but make sure that your goals are in alignment with getting the right leads. And if you're interested in a high volume lead metric, you better have a lead quality metric as well. How many of those convert into MQLs, or how many of those convert into set appointments? You've got to be measuring both, or else you'll end up just creating a burden for your sales team, and people don't have enough resources to staff enough people to manage really high qualities or high volumes of bad leads.
That's right.
Yeah. You also mentioned one more thing I want to go back to, which is lookalike audiences. We do this, as we do our social marketing on LinkedIn and things like that. Can you explain to people what a lookalike audience is? Because I think, Mark, some of the folks that are listening aren't marketing experts, and so that term might not make any sense to them.
I'm probably not the best person even to explain that kind of thing. And, Matthew Jonas over at Top Fire probably do a better job of it. But essentially what we're looking to do is to find people that are typical of what we want to find as a franchise buyer, and then match them up through algorithms that are done on a social media platform like Facebook, and have something like Facebook serve us similar kinds of potential prospects to whom we're going to serve these ads. And the broader the database that you have of, or to begin with, in terms of what your lookalike audience is, the more refined you can make that search look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll share a little bit on it on top of that as well, because I'm quite familiar with it. So back-end algorithms inside of Facebook are eerily powerful. And what you can do is, if you have a lookalike audience of over 1,000 people, let's say you have a list of 1,000 people who have bought franchises before, and so you know that these are people who are viable candidates and are successful owners of a franchise, and you plug that into Facebook and say, I want to find people like this. Facebook has thousands of data points about each one of them, and it'll identify, using its artificial intelligence, trends in their profile and behavior that aligns with this big segment of people that you don't have any connection or knowledge with right now. And then Facebook will continually massage their back-end algorithms to try to get your ads in front of the right people and get them to click on them. And now you're turning their AI, it's like interest rates, right? You want your interest rates working for you, not against you. You're using their AI algorithm now to work for you, not against you, because it'll be self-learning when you put enough data into it. Any machine learning model will be, and they'll start to identify very quickly, well, who's the right person, who's clicking on these ads, and you'll start making incremental changes. So it's getting better and better and better at targeting the right candidates that will convert as a lead and also then convert as a buyer. Now they don't know the second half of that equation, but you do. And so it's really powerful. This whole concept of lookalike audiences, you can use it on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I'm sure most platforms are monetizing this way now. TikTok, I think, is starting to develop it more. So you need to pay attention to also the platforms, like who's on it. TikTok's great, guys, but if you're trying to sell franchises, I haven't heard a great story yet of someone who's selling a lot of franchises to 13 to 24-year-olds that live on TikTok. So make sure you're using the right platform where your buyers are spending their time. Facebook is one of them. I'll tell you that.
Well, the top bar guys, they have like, it's in the tens of thousands. I think it was 40,000 plus in terms of their lookalike audience. So they got a very robust lookalike audience, and so it's been very successful for a number of their clients.
Oh yeah. Well, we mutually work with a lot of them. And I can tell you, I won't share, but I've seen people go from no names, but from 10 leads a month to 180 leads a month in a very short period of time, and they're good. These are not garbage leads. So talk about creating a private channel. Nobody else gets that lead. So that's why I think it's so valuable to invest in that type of a strategy now, because there are still people looking, and the people that are looking, even if it's a lower volume, tend to be higher quality right now. They're like, I'm disenfranchised with corporate America. I've got money. I want to be my own boss. That's who we want in a franchise system, typically. Not, I don't know what to do with my life. I just graduated college. We've had a lot of those over the last few years, and some of them turn out great. High energy, very smart. Mom and dad can fund them, and they succeed. But I think the quality and the caliber is going to probably continue to go up as more and more layoffs happen in corporate America.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, let's shift. You talked about brokers, and I want to make sure we have time for this because, Mark, that's a landscape. I love the broker communities. I work with a lot of them personally, but I would love to get kind of your feedback on what's been changing in the way that the broker community has shifted as franchise sales has also been changing over the years.
Well, and the big thing that's changed in the broker community is there's a lot more brokers out there. 10 years ago, the broker community had, was responsible for a pretty significant number of franchise sales. And there was a relatively small number of brokers that were out there. Today, they're still responsible for about the same number of franchise sales, but the number of brokers that are out there has essentially probably quintupled during that same period of time. And these brokers are, for the most part, harvesting their leads from the same places. The brokers are looking on the internet. The brokers are going to outsource firms and placement firms, and they're all going to the same kinds of places. So the implications for franchisors are that while it used to be that you could network with a handful of brokers in an individual brokerage company, today that same brokerage company, there are some of these brokerage companies out there today that have 600 brokers in them. If you're not actively participating in the broker shows, if you're not on the broker calls, if you're not, really being very aggressive in terms of the networking that you do with the brokers, you are not going to be anywhere near the top of the food chain in terms of them knowing who you are. The other thing that's happened in the brokerage community is private equity. So the private equity guys that have jumped into the marketplace these days have a 5-year turnaround on most of their investments. So, an equity guy comes in, they buy a company, they got to show growth. They got to show growth over the course of 5 years. And so while brokerage commissions used to be, $10,000, $15,000, pretty quickly they went up to $20,000. We're seeing some brokerage commissions that are in excess of the franchise fees. We're seeing some brokerage commissions, $60,000. And it's like, where people are paying huge brokerage commissions for selling, if you sell the third franchise of a 3-pack, it's in excess of what the initial franchise fee is. And because these brokerage or these private equity companies are telling the brokerage community, look, you really need to get aggressive with our particular brand, and are figuring that these brokers are going to be much more inclined to represent for a higher commission. And what that's ending up doing is it's making it much more difficult for some of the smaller brands who can't afford to pay brokerage fees that are in excess of the amount of franchise fee that they've got, especially when you start factoring in some of the support costs that they have to open up a location.
Oh yeah.
To compete from a financial standpoint with this. So you're seeing much higher fees and a need to network across a much broader channel of franchise brokers in that channel distribution. So it is becoming a little bit more, or a lot more competitive for, especially for newer franchisors that are not private equity backed to try to compete in that marketplace.
Yeah, and let me ask you a question, Mark, because I've got mixed feelings about this, but if I'm a new franchise concept, and a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are, is the first move when you're trying to sell franchise units, should you go straight to brokers, or would you recommend maybe do that a little bit differently? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Generally speaking, no. I mean, to me, when you're a newer franchisor, you want to be local with your growth. So you don't, and a broker network is not designed for local growth. It's designed to provide a more regional or national rollout. And what my recommendation for a newer franchisor is to be within about a 3-hour drive time of where your first operating location or where your prototype locations are, so that you can provide adequate support to your franchisees and make them brand ambassadors for you. So when you're first getting started, trying to go to a broker network, number one, you're probably not going to get noticed. Number two, you probably can't afford to go to all these broker shows and pay the kind of commissions that would bring you to the top of mind. Number three, you don't want to be on any kind of a national rollout with these guys to begin with, because you don't want to be that far removed from them. And you're probably not even going to get into a lot of these broker networks. Some of these brokerage networks nowadays actually have entrance fees. Some of them, in excess of $20,000 just to get into the brokerage network. So, and for that, you're not guaranteed any sales. You're not guaranteed, any particular coverage. So it's brokerage networks are definitely not the way to go when you're first getting started, unless you're a relatively large company with a national rollout strategy and some substantial money behind you to be able to get it done.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of my advice. I've always said that 4 to 5 hour drive time, but 3 is better, honestly. But your first 10 locations, 5 minimum, have to be successful, right? You have to have a good item 19 that's strong. If you don't have an item 19, you go to a broker network, unless it's some sexy concept that blows everyone's mind. You're not going to get any traction. They're smart enough people to know that's a big fat risk, and I'm spending, let's say I'm spending $1,000 to $1,500 to get a deal ready to go to a franchisor out of pocket. I can't risk that on a concept that's unproven. And so there's also that kind of risk factor of engaging the brokers, where these are savvy businessmen that are selling businesses for a living. And so you need to make sure that you're prepared with the right metrics and the right strategy, and also the right income. Because you're right. I think, your brokers are amazing. I can see how well they help brands to grow. But generally speaking, your strategy with each broker group you work with is, I've got to get the mind share of a dozen to 20 people that are going to regularly produce for me. Like, if you're not, but that's going to mean you've got to engage with hundreds of them to get to that 15 to 20 mark, to get the people that are becoming true brand ambassadors for you. That's hard. It's a lot of work. And if you're a solopreneur just starting a franchise system, you don't have time and you don't have the money to invest what you need to get in front of those people and create that kind of channel.
And you also have to get the credibility with these guys. And these guys want to know that you can close deals. I mean, ultimately, it's about your ability to close a deal, as well as your ability to provide service and support to that franchisee. And if you can't close the deal, they don't get paid. So they want to know that you're going to do a good job, and they've got no validation because you haven't closed the deal yet. So it's hard to get in. It's hard to get in as a young franchisor with a broker. So you haven't closed the deal yet. Like you said, you'd have to have a pretty sexy concept, even with a strong item 19, to get in the door with a lot of these broker networks early on.
Yeah, and a lot of them are pretty ethical people. They'll turn you down. They'll say you're not quite ready. Everybody loves money, but a lot of them will say you're not ready. Like we can't do
That's
anything.
right.
So yeah, so I think that's good advice. As we talk about brokers, realize when you start into growth mode, you've got your solid 5 that are operating or so, and you've got some capital. You've also got the ability to support. That's the downside of the broker network, and this is a positive downside, right? It's like your interview questions. What's your weakness? I've just worked too hard. But the broker networks, they are great at generating volume. Once you have the right concept, you engage properly. But if you've got 5 units and then you push the broker community hard and they bring you 15 units, it's a good equation for a bankruptcy or a total failure, and then a fail rate that's so high that your numbers are going to be screwed up for the next 5 years on your FTD. So you've got to make sure you balance that, because if you do a good job and you sell a lot through brokers, they'll flood you if they fall in love with your concepts. You've also got to make sure you're balancing that a little. What advice would you give people about that, Mark?
Well, I think you always have to be responsible for your growth, regardless of where it comes from. Growth always has to happen under control, and it's whether it comes from the broker network, whether it comes from organic lead generation, whether it comes from your paid lead generation. No matter what, you're responsible for growing under control and at a rate of speed that you can support your franchisees. You're also responsible for making sure that the franchisees you select have a good chance of success, and that means they should be adequately capitalized. They should be close enough that you can support them. They should be smart enough that you think they're going to succeed in the business. They should be hardworking enough. They should be well qualified enough. The first rule of franchise success is that, if you want to be successful as a franchisor, make sure your franchisees succeed. And, so if, ultimately as a franchisor, if you do nothing else, make your franchisees successful and you'll succeed. Ultimately, successful franchisees pay their royalties, they require less support, they buy additional franchises, they validate well, they become your best salespeople, and they are going to be the backbone of your system. And just the opposite is true with failed franchises. You want to talk about a formula for a failed franchisor? Sell franchises that are going to fail. If you sell you have failed franchisees,
yeah,
your franchise system is going to fail, and you're out of the franchise game. Probably not just once, but forever.
Yeah, it's a community. You certainly can't. Well, I won't use that metaphor, but you certainly can't taint the water, right? Because people won't trust you. Brokers, remember, you burn a broker on a deal, I promise that word spreads pretty fast, and that kind of poisons the well a little bit. So great. Well, Mark, let's end on a positive note here. So some final thoughts. Let's say a lot of this has been advice for kind of the emerging growing brands. For more established brands that are trying to engage broker networks, what advice would you give them? Like how do you leverage that channel effectively when you're in the position to really go nuts and scale, and you can do so responsibly?
Well, I think that the way that you leverage that particular channel is that you make sure that you're engaging the channel. You don't just join a broker network and sit on your hands. You have to go to the broker conventions. You have to sponsor. You have some of the broker events. You have to be on the broker calls. You have to make sure that your commissions that are being paid are at least somewhat competitive. You may not be able to afford being at the top end of the market when you're dealing with competing with some of the private equity groups that are out there, but you should at least be somewhat competitive. You need to make sure that the brokers understand what it is that makes you different in the marketplace, and what it is that you are looking for in a franchisee, and why particular franchisees would be particularly well suited to you. So, it's really like almost everything in franchising. It's a relationship business, and developing the relationships with these brokers. There's a lot of brokerage companies that are out there, and the brokerage companies that are out there, you know, you wouldn't want to try and start engaging a lot of them at one time. Build a relationship with one broker network. Pick the one that you think is a good fit for you from a strategic and geographic standpoint. And then once you've developed that relationship, if you've got the bandwidth to take on another one, that's when you start looking at taking on the second one or maybe even a third one.
Yeah, that's great advice. I want to, if you don't mind, Mark, share a thought on that. I was talking to a brand a while ago, and they said, I don't know if I'll work with broker networks again. I said, well, that's interesting. At your stage, I'm surprised to hear you say it. It's like, yeah, I signed up for a whole bunch of them. I paid like $100,000 in fees to be involved in a bunch of them. I didn't get a single lead. And then I asked, so how did you engage? Like, what did you do? It's like, well, I just, I paid the money, I made sure my listings were up. Like the answer was there was no outward effort, partly because this particular person didn't have the bandwidth to do it. And so I just want to validate what you're saying. Like in real life, you can go spend a bunch of money and join a whole bunch of these networks, but just having your name on a list will not sell a single unit for you. Maybe a single unit, but you've got to truly invest in the broker relationships. I've seen that time and time and time again. We had a podcast on that a couple of years ago with Eric Van Horn, maybe it's a year and a half ago, but and same advice from two of the smartest people that I know in franchising. We got Mark here and we've got Eric. So make sure you listen to this advice because it can save you a lot of money and also help you bring on the right number of franchises in the right pace using the broker networks because they're awesome. You just have to get. Yeah. Mark, you've been great. I sure appreciate you making time to join us. And there are probably 4 or 5 other topics we could pick your brain on. So don't be surprised if I reach out again to try to bring in the master to share some more wisdom with the group.
Well, I sure appreciate you having me on, Dave. I enjoyed talking with you and hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again, Mark.